program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson, and it's my pleasure tonight to have Dr. Nakayama with us. And we're going to talk about cabbages and kings and many, many issues. So welcome, Dr. Nakayama.
Thanks, Joe Sam.
Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Well, you know, you're a man of many parts, and I could start off by saying you're the chief of surgery at Mercer University. Is that correct? And professor?
That's right. I'm the chair of surgery at Mercer, and I'm the program director in residency in general surgery at the Medical Center of Central Georgia.
So you have a lot of teaching responsibility, and many, many different things occupy your time these days.
Oh,
Is
absolutely.
that correct?
Yeah.
Well, now maybe we could just discuss how you came to come to the beautiful city of Macon, Georgia, and this part of the world. What happened exactly? Did you grow up in California? Where did you?
Well, actually, I was recruited here, and my background is that I was program director and chair of the Department of Surgery at New Hanover Regional Medical Center, which is a campus of the University of North Carolina and Chapel Hill School of Medicine.
Now, can I interrupt you briefly, Dr. Nakayama? I know that you're wearing an interesting tie there. Can you tell us about that tie? What type of tie is that?
It's a UNC tie. It's got a emblem of the old well.
Now, what exactly was the old well?
The old well was the center of campus in Chapel Hill for the university.
And so are there many people that are quite patriotic about being a Tar Heel?
Yeah,
and I think you may be one of them. Is that
they're
correct?
Very patriotic about being a Tar Heel.
So you enjoyed your time in North Carolina, and why don't you just discuss your journey through life? And you were there and program chairman, and what happened before that?
Well, actually, I went to medical school at the University of California. Before that, I was an undergraduate at Stanford University.
Now, that's Tiger Woods' home university, is that right?
Were
you contemporaneous with him? Or?
No, I was contemporaneous, actually, with Tom Watson. Tom Watson and I were the same class.
The golfer, right?
The golfer, right.
Did you ever hit the little white ball around? Or no?
I did not as well as Tom did, but
no.
He was a champion while he was at Stanford, and he did very well.
And so you were there, and what did you were always interested in medicine? Did you?
Well, actually, I was a pre-med there, and it was a good combination of science and humanities, and that's what attracted me.
It was a rather grueling event, I bet, going through the.
Well, it was not easy, but being a pre-med is just you learn dedication and learning how to apply yourself to studies and such, and that really is the basis of a medical education.
Now, did you enjoy organic chemistry?
Organic chemistry. The reason why Joe Sam and I are laughing is because organic chemistry is the screen, and that's probably the toughest course, and that's the one that eliminates a lot of people from being a pre-med.
That's a little doctor joke there, because organic chemistry is always a terrible ordeal to go through, and I'm not sure it's that. I'm not sure how useful that ordeal has proved. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, you never use it again.
That's right.
Sure.
That's for sure.
But it's the basis of pharmacology, and it turns out that's the basis of biochemistry. And biochemistry, after all, is now one of the foundations of medical science. We couldn't do without it.
Well, understanding cellular metabolism, and then we sort of we can segue into genetics and the DNA, and so it's a pretty. It's right down at home base there.
It's incredible. It's amazing how much medicine has changed and medical science has changed since you and I went to medical school.
Well, that's right, and I think that's a big point, isn't it? Just in general, the idea of rote memory, the idea you're going to memorize something and that's the answer, and it turns out that's not the case, is it? Because things change. We have tremendous changes in healthcare and medicine.
Yeah, things change so rapidly that I think rote memory actually does you a disservice. I think that there's so much information and so much new stuff coming out that rather than memorization of facts, you have to leverage your ability to get information with available information technology. And so that's being able to use computers and being able to access information when you need it at the patient's bedside. is a much more valuable skill now than just rote memorization.
You know, I've been impressed about taking an old medical textbook, maybe one from 1900 or 1850, and then 1950 and 2000, just comparing those textbooks, and they're always extraordinarily dogmatic. So this is the way to do it, and each with 50-year intervals. And actually, there's been so much change. I think the idea is this is a temporary viewpoint. That's not a bad way to think about it, because no information is coming in. So that would be a good way to do it.
I think if you see something in a textbook, it's guaranteed to be out of date.
Yes, it is. Well, now your travels took you to San Francisco, and
I was at the University of California Medical Center in San Francisco, and that's where I did my medical school, but also I did my surgical training. At the time, it was one of the top centers, certainly on the West Coast, for surgical training.
Well, you're being quite modest about that, and I notice you've kind of weakened your statement by saying at the time. I mean, it's still a pretty good place, is it not?
Oh, it's outstanding.
What was that like? Was it sort of a big city place, and you had lots of
very
patients?
much a big city place, but it had the advantage, as a lot of these big training programs have, of having a medical center that was part of the university, but also having a VA hospital and also having a general hospital where you saw patients of different backgrounds.
Yes,
so
yes.
It was a multi-institution, multi-hospital institution that provided very rich surgical training.
And so you stayed there. Were your mentors tough on you? Which is, I think that's one of the things that happens. We can talk about that as we go along.
Oh, absolutely.
With surgical education.
Well, that's part about surgical education, is that your role model. And I think that you see people doing the things that you aspire to do, and with an attitude and a professional attitude that's very inspiring.
And that's a big thing, isn't it? I mean, the whole idea of the concept of medicine, putting the patient first, and the rigor of just the total devotion and no sacrifices too much for your patient.
Well, you know, that's actually old school, very old school.
Well, I'm an old school guy here.
And you and I trained in that environment, and we believe in that environment. But now we see that rather than having a very individualistic relationship with a patient and an individual relationship with a mentor, we see ourselves now in a more organic whole.
Yes.
And it's all about team-based care, and understanding that medicine and nursing and all the allied health services have gotten so complicated that it's impossible for one person to really master it all. And so you rely on the professionalism of other areas. And so it's really a more complex organism. The other thing is that there's no sacrifice that's too great, but we understand that if you make too many sacrifices, that's not being fair to yourself, to your family, or to your patient, because you have fatigue, you have inattention to detail, eventually because you're so tired. And at the end of the day, what happens is that your professionalism suffers, because then you try your darndest to get jobs done rather than to do what's right for the patient. So the paradigm has shifted.
So that's a rather complicated thing, isn't it? I mean, and we could maybe just talk a little bit about that with surgical training. And the idea is, in the old days, certainly when I passed through that process, it was 120 hours a week, and I walked 7 miles barefoot through the snow.
Yeah,
it was
both ways. Yeah.
I mean, you have all these war stories about how rigorous the training was. And now it was. And the idea now is that it's necessary to have time to sleep and to learn. And so there's a limitation, is there not, on the work week of a
absolutely. There is a limitation. And it's an understanding that just as an airline pilot can only maintain his alertness for so long before he or she becomes tired or fatigued,
yes,
and has inattention to the things that he or she has to have attention to. The same thing goes for people in medicine, and particularly in learners, because learners have other responsibilities. They have the responsibility not only of the patients, but also a responsibility to learn and to gain new knowledge. And so there's limitations as far as work hours, as far as supervision.
Yes.
Some limitations of work hours might seem extreme, but for us who have trained in an era before, the limitation of 8 hours per week would seem outlandish to some, but for us it's a very limited time, whereas traditionally we would work 120 hours a week.
So what Dr. Nakayama is speaking about is that there's new regulations that have come along just in general, let's say in the past, is it a decade or so, that it's a surgical resident. A surgical resident really can't be expected to work any more than 80 hours a week in his works.
Yeah. Plus, there's a limitation of the number of days on call that he or she has to take. You and I used to do every other night on
Sure.
call.
And live in the hospital.
And live in the hospital. That's why they call them residents,
Yes,
because
yes,
they're a resident in the
yes.
hospital. But now the limitation is 1 out of every 3 maximum.
Yes.
And they have to have 1 day, 1 calendar day out of 7 off.
Really?
Yeah. And
Well, I think
so
the Bible talked about that, did it not?
the Bible does
I'm
talk
glad
about
to know
that.
there's surgical
And there is
mentors.
precedents back
Just
in
one, yes, yes.
that date back to millennia. That's
Yes,
for sure.
yes. So in your journey through life, you're actually tremendously good institutions. I mean, there's no question those are really extraordinary places. You had your training there, and then you went into pediatric surgery, did you not?
Yeah, after my training in University of California at San Francisco in general surgery, and I'm boarded in general surgery, and that's for all phases of general surgery, that is adult surgery. Then I did added training in pediatric surgery at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia.
Now, that's CHOPS, did I get that right? Or
Yeah, CHOP is the acronym.
Yes.
And that's what all the pediatricians know it as.
Yes,
CHOP.
yes. And one could say, I mean, modestly, that's the premier place for that particular doctor. Was Dr. Gross there? I'm trying to think.
No,
who was
Dr. Coop. Sierra Coop was
yeah, but I was trying to think, weren't there just extraordinary people at Penn? And was he the first person to do?
He was the first person to specialize in pediatric surgery there at the University of Pennsylvania. University of Pennsylvania had their reputation, but the place where pediatric surgery really got its start was at the Children's Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts.
Yes.
And then
It migrated to.
And then CHOP followed soon after. But CHOP actually was the first children's hospital
Yes.
in the U.S. and actually was the first medical school
Yes,
in the U.S.
yes. So this migration, in some ways, paralleled Benjamin Franklin when he left Boston and came to sort of a similar migration.
Yeah,
to,
except
yes.
that unlike Benjamin Franklin, I wasn't shipwrecked on the shores of New Jersey. But
Well, so you were really in a stellar place there. That was extraordinary. It must have been a tremendous. You had the privilege and the honor of operating on very sick children and small infants.
And that's the specialty of pediatric surgery. I joke that the average age of my patients is 0, but that's not far out of the ordinary because a lot of it deals with congenital malformations that afflict newborns. And so our job is to fix the newborn so that they survive, that they can eat, that they can swallow, that they can breathe. It's really basic stuff that we deal with.
And you're with really little people. I mean, is that it's under really small creatures, is that right?
Small children, premature children who have their own set of diseases that we have to take care of. They have their own unique physiology that we have to attend to. So it's demanding, yet at the same time tremendously satisfying because you're dealing with a patient that has 80 years ahead of them.
Yes.
And so you're dealing with an entire lifetime.
Yes. And so as the organs mature, this is the chance to make sure everything is hooked up correctly.
Exactly right. Yeah, and it's extremely gratifying because typically you've got 2 anxious parents, you have 2 sets of very anxious grandparents.
Yes.
And then you have this poor kid, and then there's no greater responsibility to have someone say, okay, take my child, operate on the child.
Yes.
And the professional rewards are immense.
Yes. Well, I can recollect my time at a children's hospital in Chicago with doing pediatric neurosurgery there. It's certainly very challenging, stressful thing to do, and I admire you for choosing that as your.
And that also is very much a team sport because we can't do it without anesthesiologists, anesthetists, even the scrub tech and the circulating nurse have to know the operations.
Yes.
Before the operation, we involve the pediatrician, the neonatologist. After the operation, we often have critical care people.
Yes.
We have neonatologists. We have specialty nurses in both the neonatal intensive care unit, pediatric intensive care unit, and then rehab is such a big part of this because the kids, if they remain disabled, they have to learn how to eat. They have to learn how to swallow.
Yes.
They have to learn how to. A lot of times they need respiratory therapy, and so it really does. It does take a village.
And so one of your jobs is mentoring these young surgeons that you're under your tutelage now and training them. And one of the things, I guess, is to convince them that's the right way to do things, and it's how to create a situation in their own professional life that they can maximize patient outcome. And it requires the ability to cooperate with all the services. And is that correct?
Yeah, no question. I think you know, in the paradigm that we have in surgical education now, there's recognized as 6 core competencies.
Yes.
One is patient care. Okay, that makes sense.
Yes.
Medical knowledge is the basis of that. But not so recognized is the attitude that you have something that's very important, that's professionalism.
Yes.
You have the ability to communicate not only to the patient, but also to the other people around you. So it's communication is key. There's a system-based practice concept where you can't do anything by yourself, that you have to work within a system that includes the hospital, that includes the nurses, that includes the people in the community, that includes the patient's own personal physician, but also all the resources that are attendant to that impact on health.
Yes, yes.
And then finally, there's a concept called practice-based learning and improvement, whereby what you do as a doctor, it always depends on constant improvement. And the way that you improve is you study, but also you take a look at your own results.
Yes.
And you see whether or not your results reach the benchmark that other people reach. And you compare what you do with what other people do, and you work to try to get your system of care to match those so that you get those same outcomes.
Yeah, one of the most important things I think going on is you sort of talked about this cybernetic loop, the idea that you sort of self-correct as you go through, but it's extremely important to have good outcome data, good outcome analysis of any of the interventions that physicians, I guess, undertake. And that's really a very vexing task, isn't it? To get
outcome analysis is huge, because what you have to do is you have to choose your measures.
Yes.
You have to see whether or not you're reaching those measures.
Yes.
And you have to do an analysis on what sort of things you do that impact on that. And so you have a bar, you have a bogey, okay, and then you see where you are. And the only way you do that is you systematically get this data on a regular basis.
Yes.
And then you see what you do that impacts on it, not only yourself, but also all the systems that impact on it. Are the nurses doing what they're doing? Are the respiratory therapists doing what we're doing? Is the hospital or the practice supporting these people to do a good job? And that's the challenge that we face.
Now, this is a rather complicated subject. I mean, you alluded to it, but it's something that's becoming extremely germane for the American people.
Absolutely.
I mean, right now, we're here as physicians, and we have our world. And it's something that in some ways, I guess the citizens of this part of the country sort of, they can come and they can see occasionally they can meet us in many times they'd rather not. I mean, it's a life or death situation, but they come in contact with us. But we have this whole system that we have now is under enormous review and change. And a lot of this has a financial basis to it.
Oh,
and I know I'm going to just throw you this softball, but one of the degrees that you have, I think, is an MBA. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Well, why don't you talk about that? How did you do that? And is this useful as you try and perfect a system that renders supreme patient care?
Well, anytime you're dealing with people and dollars, you have to be a good husband of those resources.
Yes.
And so if you're entrusted with people, dollars, and patients' lives, then the stakes go way up.
Yes.
And so in doing that, I was confident of my ability to affect medical care.
Right. Yes.
But I was totally dependent on other people to provide people, the organization, and to provide finances.
Yes.
And so I figured that I needed to do this part of it as well as I could do appendectomies.
Yes.
And it became apparent to me that I had to retool.
Yes.
And this was relatively late in my professional career. And so what I did was I had to get an MBA. And so there are programs available to physicians for them to get executive MBAs. But the rigor, the thing that I appreciated about the UNC approach was that they gave us the same curriculum that they used for their own MBAs.
Yes.
It wasn't a watered down version. I had to study. I had to.
Wow. Those guys study? They do, huh?
But the good thing about doing it this way was I had a ready-made laboratory to test the stuff that I was learning.
Right.
And so that's what makes an adult learner so valuable, because what happens is that he or she has experience in real life, and then he or she applies what he or she learns to the goals that come in their jobs on a day-to-day basis.
Yes. Well, this must have been stressful. Presumably, you had full-time academic responsibilities or professional responsibilities,
had
and
to
you were
give.
and so you were at the same time also doing the MBA work. It must
Yeah,
have been very tough.
at that time I was surgeon-in-chief of the Children's Hospital, North Carolina Children's Hospital.
Wow, that's a huge deal, isn't it? That's a big deal.
And I was a professor of surgery, and I had an endowed chair at the University of North Carolina.
Wow.
And so what I had to do was I said, but it became apparent that was my weakness.
Yes.
And so I said, okay, hey, I got to do this
Yes.
because in order to be taken seriously, I had to talk the language. In order
Yes.
to
Yes.
propose projects that had
Yes.
a hope of getting implemented, I had to implement business plans,
Yes,
formulate
yes.
business plans. In order to budget, I had to be able to read a spreadsheet. And I had none of those skills. And I
Wow.
was just pretending. And
Yes.
so it was one of those things where I had to say, in time-honored Southern fashion,
Yes.
I'll never go hungry again.
Yes.
I had to learn those skills.
Well, kudos to you. That's an extraordinary thing, and it's a very timely skill to have obtained. But isn't the question we have its value, its healthcare value,
Absolutely.
and we've got it. So as physicians, when we use resources to get the very best outcome that we can for our patient, we've got to be wise custodians of those resources and understand the value that can be obtained.
Right.
And that's frequently difficult, isn't it?
Well,
And-
value equals quality over cost.
Yes.
All right? You want maximum quality,
Yes.
and you want moderate cost. Okay?
Yes.
You don't want minimal cost because
Right.
at some point you start cutting to the bone, and that doesn't make any sense.
Yes.
But if you have the very simple formula, value equals quality over cost, then you do things that maximize quality, and you do things that moderate cost.
Yes.
And you recognize that they go hand in glove. Okay, you got to spend money to get quality. At the same time, you want to make sure that the resources you devote maximize quality and minimize waste.
Well, and just to ask the question, I mean, we spend, and this is sort of an ethical question that I think is going to be put before the public pretty soon.
Sure.
We're going to have a national debate about how healthcare money is spent, and it's very expensive to take care of sick children, is it not? And I mean, is somebody going to try and, I guess, impinge on that situation? I mean, how are we going to respond to the fear of rationing? I guess healthcare rationing, tremendous dogmatic decreases in the money available to treat sick patients.
Well, those are the expenditure resources really are political decisions, and those are political decisions are made by the people. And as people feel the pressure of having medical care, they either have to devote the money or decide and make very hard choices. And I think those are what our elected representatives are supposed to do. As physicians, what we can do
Yes.
is we can do what we can impact
Yes,
on.
yes.
And what we can impact on is maximizing quality.
Yes.
And we can do the things that we can do, and we can minimize waste, and there's tremendous waste in the system. I think there are ways of devoting resources that maximize value, and I think that's my optimistic view.
Yes.
That said, the political sphere is macroeconomical view, okay? And I think that we have to decide how much money is it worth for us to have useful life. The greatest example I have is back when we were in training.
Yes.
People our age used to die regularly of heart disease, okay? And we would be of an age that
Yes.
we would be waiting for the big one. In
Right,
other words,
yes,
a coronary
yes,
event.
yes.
And after we had a coronary event, we'd have crescendo angina, and we might have a bypass that had a high mortality. But guys our age seldom live past the age of 65. Okay, if we did, then we succumb from cancer.
Yes.
Now things have changed. Now the lifespan or the life expectancy is now routinely in the 80s. Okay. The incidence of heart disease, like we
Yes,
had,
right.
like we saw in our training, has gone down.
Yes.
Because of medical advances.
Yes.
And so we as a society have to decide how much is that worth. And some healthcare economists estimate that for each year saved is equal to $100,000.
Yes.
And so, what is the cost of $100,000?
Yes.
A productive, very productive, health,
Yes.
okay, to Americans from 65 to 85. And if you use that paradigm, it's more than $2 million each.
Yes.
And so if you take a look at the economics of healthcare, you've got to take that into account. And so is it worth a sixth of our gross national product? I'd say it probably is.
Well, how about a fifth? I mean, if I could, so really what we're having this national debate about what value we get from our healthcare system. And so if you said, well, all right, we're going to spend some extra money, but we're going to give you another 20 years of useful life, and to sacrifice, you're going to have to do something like not turn the air conditioning on every night. Some kind of sacrifices. You won't be able to go to the movies, only how often one goes to the movies. There can be sacrifices that happen that might really, the trade-off might be important. But I think what the public insists on and what we as physicians have to do is we have to find a way to make the system efficient. And if we say, okay, we're going to spend huge amounts of money on health care, we've got to say that there's not any substantial waste in that. We're being good custodians and stewards of all the money that's going into the healthcare system. I think the operative word is stewardship. The idea that we really have responsibility for all these expenses, and unfortunately, I don't think the system allows that sense of stewardship to be as overt as you and I might like it. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think stewardship not only refers to the physicians as being stewards of the profession, but also to the governmental people, the people in government who are stewards, who are making these decisions.
Yes.
But also the people themselves.
Yes.
They have to be stewards of their own health.
Yes.
And I think they have to somehow feel the economic costs of their decisions. They have to feel that it's expensive to smoke, that it's expensive to have expensive lifestyles, it's expensive to have bad diets.
Yes.
Obesity is expensive.
Right, right.
Okay, diabetes, adult onset
Yes,
diabetes
yes.
that's associated with obesity is expensive.
Yes.
And I think that at some point it's got to, the people in this country have got to feel the economic consequences.
Yes.
Of that. How it's done, it's got to be different than what they have now, where there is no consequence.
Yes.
Everything is free. There's no consequence to that. And how do you align the incentives toward health as opposed toward being treated as a result of self-imposed disease or self-imposed conditions is really the expensive question that we have to come to grips with.
You know, I'm reminded of a little line out of the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, if I got that, by T.S. Eliot, and the line is, "Dare I eat a peach?" So the idea is, it's a philosophical issue, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, we don't want to be so restrictive to people that they couldn't, I don't know, jump on a trampoline if they so wished, or have a big hamburger. But a sense of excess and an absence of self-control, it does inflict some kind of penalty. I mean, and I think as physicians, what we often see with our patients is a certain absence of responsibility to take the medicine or to observe good health dynamics, and that's really is often a very frustrating thing, is it not?
Well, there are three principles of prevention. There's education, there's engineering, and then there's enforcement.
Yes.
Okay? And education is very American, okay?
Right.
Because people can make their decisions based on what they know about.
Yes.
As far as engineering is, you prevent people from making the wrong decisions.
Yes.
Like you can't plug in certain kind of outlets,
Yes.
okay? Or you can't
Right.
turn on your
Yes.
car without putting your foot on the brake.
Right.
And enforcement, you just make it illegal for them to do stuff. And the American way is the first, is education. The other two are anathema to American way.
Yes, yes.
But unfortunately, what we have now is a situation where, people understand that there's different grades of motels, like Motel 6 or the Hyatt Regency or the Ritz.
Yes.
And so they choose Motel 6. Okay. In healthcare, everyone wants the Ritz.
Yes.
And so it's hard to guide patients to those sorts of decisions without them feeling the economic
Well,
consequences.
we're going to have, as you've been a fascinating guest, we're going to have you back next week, and we're going to continue our conversation. And maybe we can get into what's wrong with politicians when we have that conversation. So
Okay.
I'll lure you to make some comments. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to meeting you next week.
Sam.
Good to see you. Thank you. We're going to hear something, I think.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.